Welcome, friends. You've tuned in to Reflections, which is a program sponsored by Paducah Cooperative Ministry, where together we do God's work with human hands. I'm Karen Winkel. I'm the pastor at United Church of Paducah, and with me today, the co-host and colleague extraordinaire is Gregory Waldrop. Welcome, Gregory.
Glad to be right here with you again.
Now tell folks where you pastor.
Yeah, I'm the pastor at Fountain Avenue United Methodist Church. I've been at sort of the downtown tour of United Methodist churches, and now for the last 4 months I'm at Fountain Avenue. I'm glad to be there and glad to be here with you.
Wonderful.
Good gift. We're thrilled to have with us other pastors for this Bible study setting. Glad to have Pastor Stephen Wood from St. Matthew Lutheran Church. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you.
We also have with us Donnie Walkup, pastor at the Miracle Temple Christian Church, the Disciples of Christ Church, over on Park Avenue. Martin Luther King. Great. Glad both of you here. Welcome. Tell us about what's going on at St. Matthew's and at Miracle Temple.
Go ahead.
Well, the Miracle Temple, God is blessing us. It's a place where all people are being blessed. We are about a few weeks away from closing on building a new 9,600 square foot facility for the Lord, for the community, and we're just excited about that and looking for the assignment that God has for Miracle Temple in Paducah.
Great.
I've been pastoring there for 14 years now.
Well, I've begun my 7th year at St. Matthew, and things are continuing to go. This year is our anniversary. St. Matthew has been doing ministry within McCracken County for 150 years. A band of German immigrants in 1856 stopped and brought their trees and set them up in orchards. And so we've been at several different places throughout that history, and several different buildings we've been in. So we're doing that, and the bishop of our synod is coming, and it will be with us on our anniversary and preaching and proclaiming the word. And we've invited former pastors to come back and be a part of that celebration. So it's been a good year of remembering, and hopefully that also propels us forward as we look for ministry down the road. And even now, I'm in the midst of planning for a mission trip this summer, and those kind of events.
Great. I do believe that we do remember our way into the future, and that's a great witness. Super.
Marvelous.
We have assigned for the year the Gospel of John. We did John 1 last month, and we're into John 2 this month. We're going to tackle the familiar passage about the wedding feast of Cana, John 2, 1 through 12.
And I'll read, and I'm reading from the Revised Standard Version. Here we go, the wedding at Cana. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they remained there a few days.
What strikes you about this passage?
Go ahead.
Well, one of the first things that stood out to me was the key word, the third day. And I went back and did a little research just to understand why they, John, who was an eyewitness, he seems to detail a lot of things. And I discovered that marriages took place, if it was a virgin, on the third day of the week. And if it was a widow, it was the fourth day of the week. So this led me into then discovering that. So I found that to be an interesting fact right there, and then noticed that it must have been a family type of an event because Jesus, his mother, and the disciples were invited to this particular wedding feast.
Yeah. That third day also brings to mind the resurrection, the revelation of Jesus in power and strength, and obviously that happens at the end of his ministry. Here is the event that we sort of identify as starting his ministry, but they sort of that third day word also connects them, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that strikes me is chapter 4, where it begins and. Dear woman, why'd you involve me? And almost, you don't sort of expect Jesus. I mean, it doesn't sound very respectful. You know, why are you bothering me?
Right.
Other translations put it that he does that, and he goes on and says, because my hour has not come. Right. And that the significance of that notion of the word hour, that part of it is that what he's about will be revealed, but the time is not quite now. And so he does this miracle, but it's sort of the beginning. And at least one of the commentators that I use a lot divides the whole book of the Gospel of John into two parts, the book of signs and the book of wonders. And so this first section, chapters 1 up through part of 12, is the book of signs, where we have Jesus' miracles and teachings and the signs of what is to come, and it all points to then at beginning of chapter 13 with the Last Supper and the notion of the glory when he comes into his glory, meaning the resurrection. And so all the signs point to that.
Yeah. I've thought about this passage a lot. You know, here's Mary really sort of pushing him off, sort of, you know, setting him a sail on his ministry here. And I remembered that time in the temple where Anna says that her heart's going to be torn and pierced, and you can imagine her remembering back to this, and especially having seen him killed, crucified, and remembering and how this had to pierce her heart to imagine that, you know, it was hers to push him off. I mean, there was definitely a important relationship here with Jesus and Mary that's highlighted in all of this.
I think too that this is that particular, what you were saying was when Jesus actually began to launch his separation from his mother, and that was a way of her releasing him from under her roof so that he can then begin to do his Father's will, because from that point on is when all this, and I like what you said about the signs and wonders, because it's like an epiphany kind of thing here. It's what's happening. It's when the manifestation and the revelation of who he really is. And then over in, I think, the 20th chapter, John, when he said these signs that they will believe because of the signs and wonders that will happen. So that was interesting as I was reading this, how he launched all of that off. And an epiphany kind of thing is something where we get revelation, and I think that's something that's missing in the church today, is that expecting the unexpected, you know, and that's what he does here, something unexpected.
Well, and not only unexpected in terms of the changing the water into wine, but the result. It wasn't just that he turned water into wine, but it was the best wine. That was because, you know, the steward comes and says, "What are you doing?" You know, here, you know, normally, you know, you serve your best wine first, and then as they drink more and more, then you can serve.
It
doesn't matter anymore. But here, you know, you've saved the best for last. And so just that whole notion of all that Christ does puts forth the best.
Right.
That's
Well, I love that what this says is the first big thing. It's a wedding and it's wine. You know, it could have been anything, but
Right.
that it's this enormous celebration, and it's you know, a certain kind of elixir, if you want to call it that. It certainly I think speaks to vitality and celebration and jubilation, even though his ministry is going to be oriented toward the worst of the worst endings. What a, you know, he is that wine, the big thing.
And a promise, in a ceremony celebrating promise, faithfulness to promise to each other, covenant.
And the whole thing with that is if you read through all the Gospels, there's again and again the references to the notion of heaven being this banquet feast. That, you know, he in some of the parables compares the kingdom of God to a banquet. And food is there and sort of a celebration. And so in some ways this also sort of reminisces of that sort of a foretaste.
Right.
You know, foreshadowing of all that's to come, so that part of this, it's about gathering at the table and food, and it seems that a lot of times things happen around food. You know, that he does things gathering, that it's not just, you know, solitary and going off by myself, but he gathers people around himself, that people are gathered in community, and that's part of what the church is about being in community.
Sure. And I think the imagery of bride and bridegroom gets picked up all along the way as well, between the church and Jesus. And I think my own sense about John is, I've had this sort of idea that John has writing after he realizes that there's some folks that read Matthew, Mark, and Luke and still don't get it.
yeah.
Still don't understand who this Jesus guy is and what he did. And so I think he sort of says, okay, I'm going to write this gospel, and I'm going to write it in all capital letters on the sort of a first grade. I just have this imagination of a first grade tablet and a big pencil, and he's writing it just for all of us dummies who haven't quite gotten it yet, that Jesus is the Son of God, the Savior of the world, and all of these images sort of feed into that. My sense of it is, even the whole image of the water purification jars. You know, there are 6 that get filled full or fulfilled, and out of this fulfillment comes this new wine. It connects Jesus to the tradition. He's not something new. He's the fulfillment of the filled fullness of the Jewish promises and ceremonial work. And I think that's a powerful image, a powerful sign.
And to carry that further, you know, it talks, the water was for ceremonial washing. And then if you want to extrapolate some, he turns it into wine, which when we have the Lord's Supper, that whole notion of, you know, this cup is my blood, and the notion of Christ's blood then being, the cleansing. And so, you know, the water was used for cleansing, wine symbolically, you know, as his blood and the washing that comes about by his spilling of the blood. It just sort of ties it all together.
Sure. And as I think it's very interesting that John locates Jesus' saving work in his life. You know, as we know, John does not remember the Lord's Supper on the last night. He has Jesus teaching all the way through. But he does remember the Lord's Supper by these allusions to the wine, to being the true vine, by being the true bread. He locates the sacrifice of Jesus, his holy work in his life, not just in his last night, but in his whole life. And I think that's a wonderfully powerful insight.
Yeah, well, he goes on and on and on. I mean, the whole chapter of 6 is all about,
Bread.
I am the bread of life, I am the living bread from heaven. And he goes on and on about that.
Well, I'm thinking about how this speaks to the life of the church, and remembering something that a pastor friend of mine in Utah said. He said, Jesus takes water and turns it into wine, and the church takes wine and turns it into water, which is to say that we take the magnificence of grace and the giftedness that is so much a part of life with God,
Right.
and we transform it into the ordinary. We take the extraordinary, we take the graciousness of God and make it plain. And that has very much stayed with me, and I think that is our choice always in our discipleship, to participate with Christ in doing the things that, or being open to the things that lead on to the much more than, the surprise of grace, or pinch it down or pinch it off and take it down a notch.
Diminish it, shorten it.
And that's one of the things I think as I reviewed this chapter, I saw that we did, and you mentioned the wedding. It's ironic how he starts his ministry off at a wedding, and then in Revelation we're ending up with the lamb and the wife in a wedding. And you talk about the water being turned and the best being saved for last. Well, I saw the law as being the first and grace being the last in this chapter right here, which was saved for best. And that was the manifestation when I talked about that epiphany of this. It was the expectancy. And when I went back and really started looking at the tradition of the marriage, and it just wasn't a 20-minute ceremony.
Right.
It went on for days, and they really looked at that. And I found out it was the second most important feast of that time, other than Easter and then Pentecost. And I think what we have done, you talked about that watering down of it, we have taken away from the expecting. We don't look for God. They always were looking for, and I guess we'll get down here in a minute, but we're going to see that in the wedding, there were only a few that saw the miracle. And that's how we are, because we don't come expecting to see. And so we don't see the miracles of Jesus. You got to be expecting. We come to worship services, and do we expect to see God, or do we just come?
Right.
We water it down.
Right. Yeah. It is interesting. I think the custom of the weddings of those days was everybody brought something to sort of make the obviously 3-day celebration last. And I can imagine Jesus and his thirsty band of disciples showing up there without having prepared much, and Jesus sort of graciously accommodates this, and this notion of preparation was a part of the wedding feast. It was a part of the celebration. It is a part of faithful living in our day as well.
And I think that's where when I was looking at when the mother addressed him and asked him, I think there was this inside knowing that she had of who he was, but really didn't understand all that he was. Right. And at that moment when he said that my hour is not come, what she did was released him. And then he did something, as I was looking at this, that was when he turned the water into wine, and they took it back for the governor or the person. It let me know that Mary was an instrumental part of that service, because when the wine ran out, it was like she had some responsibility, because for the groom to run out of wine, and that that would have been an embarrassing thing.
Yeah.
And so, but then she went to Jesus, and then Jesus said, basically, don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of this. And I thought, okay, that was unique when I read that. I like that.
What do you think is there anything specific that this parable, this life experience of Jesus says to the church? today?
Well, I think part of it is, to sort of tag a little bit what you said before, with all the miracles, that sometimes I think part of it is in the church we don't expect these kind of things to happen. And that when we come to worship, sometimes we come and we sit and, okay, it was sort of nice. But part of this is it takes the ordinary and makes it extraordinary. And that whole notion of preparing ourselves as we come to worship, to enter into the presence of God, and to expect to encounter that extraordinary grace, and that whole notion, as well as I think part of it also, it talks about community, and part of the whole notion of the church being a community of faith, and not just sort of we gather together and we're there, but a community that gathers in celebration.
Right.
You know, and how often do we gather in celebration, gather around the table for food? You know, even in the early church, after Jesus' death and resurrection, with the disciples as they went forth, as they gathered, and they gathered to hear the word and to teach, and the meal. And part of that is not only was it the Lord's Supper, but it was a whole meal. It was, you know, they gathered every time around food, and how critical that is. And I think we're losing that in our society today. How many families don't even sit around the table to gather for food, and not just in the family, but as a community of faith to do that.
And we see that in a lot, being captured by other places as well. I don't know about you, but if I walk into a fast food place in the middle of the morning, there's always a little cluster of folks somewhere sitting down talking with each other. You can count on them all being there. In some of the specialty coffee shops that are around, the same kind of community grows. There's an experience, there's something that attracts us together in just that kind of way, to something necessary, something vital about those interactions.
And in that, it's the desire of God, I believe, whether we're aware or not, it's the desire of God to take that and, you know, bump it up. To, you know, I'm thinking of Emerald, you know, to take it up a notch, you know, to transform that, to use that as a catalyzing moment or a transformative moment. I'm thinking, as I'm reflecting on this passage, thinking about a tragedy that our church just experienced, a most unexpected and significant loss in the congregation, where, you know, where somebody who was the heartbeat of the church died suddenly, and we felt like we had run out, that we had nothing, you know, with that loss. And yet, as we came together, each person just really, you know, moved by the Spirit, something huge happened. It was just a remarkable thing to witness, where out of shortage we ended up with this abundance of love and an abundance of caring. It's something that just then ended up not just affecting us, but affecting layers and layers of the community, people who had not been part of a church, who knew this woman, who saw what was happening. It was just an amazing thing to see. So there we were, you know, with our, you know, the water of our tears transformed in a strange way into a kind of a wine of celebration, even in a time of loss.
That's a great witness.
I know our bishop, he's one of his big sayings he's been saying a lot at different gatherings goes into some of that a lot of times in the church, instead of operating out of a theology of abundance, that notion of looking at the greater wine, we tend to operate out of the heresy of scarcity, that we, you know, we want to reserve it, and it's like, oh, you know, we're going to run out. And part of it is relying upon God's grace, and that it is sufficient, and that it is abundant, and continuing to see how God can work in these kind of situations where out of something that we think, you know, how are we going to go on from this, that God's movement is there, and something wonderful comes out, and we're reminded again and again of how wonderful God's grace is.
Before we get complete here, is there any particular resources about the book of John? I know you talked about one of your favorite commentaries, but any particular resources you want to share with this crowd?
Well, the one that I draw to is, it's a 2-volume by Raymond Brown in the Anchor Bible series, and it's one of, a lot of scholars consider it one of the landmark studies of John. Is one of the big resources.
Sure. Brother Walkup, you got anything particular you want to?
Not particular. I basically try to draw from his word. I think that's the most reliable source, and I seek in the just inspiration from various translations and compiling them then. So, but this is my main source of reading. Everything else I like, just nitpick at. But
anybody have anything else? Any final word here out of the Gospel of John, 2nd chapter, we want to offer?
I think in conclusion, as I said earlier, as I read this, I think the church would be enhanced if we began to start looking for manifestation and revelation of God when we come together as a community as well as every day. I'm thinking as I read that and was concluding, that's what Easter was about, the unexpected. He even though he had mentioned it again, how many believed it, and he rose from the dead, and when they were walking on the Emmaus road, he appeared to them, these kinds of things. So I think when we start looking, we'll see him, because he manifests himself in places and times to all of us, not just some, but all of us.
Yep.
Anything else?
Oh, we could, just one passage. Yeah. You could spend a lot of time. That's the kind of food that we're given in this. Our time has just taken us up, and we could continue on, but we won't. I want to thank you, Pastor Wood and Pastor Walkup, for joining us today. And we want to thank our viewers for being part of this, and hope that this has enriched your day. Gregory, thank you for another beautiful time, and join us if you would, and all those who are involved in Paducah Cooperative Ministry in doing God's work with human hands. Blessings on your day. Thank you for joining us. Shalom.
Shalom.